Good afternoon, fellow Mo-Rotarians. Welcome to our guests today, some of our board members and friends. Thank you, JD, for a kind introduction. Very much appreciated. As JD said, most of you know me as a businessman, contractor in this community for a lot of years, grew up here. Linda and I enjoyed a great career as commercial building contractors in California for over 3 decades. And then 2008, 2009 came along, and like many of you, that was marked a significant change for our business, and so we elected to retire, and that's what we did. So as I talk about Cambodia, I can't do that without telling you a bit about the fact that we decided to look at what this next season of life should look like. Fairly young, still in our 50s. Some of you may have been there. So we began to look for that next chapter and what to do. And it was quite a journey we were on for a while. And then in 2010, my dad called me late in the year and asked me to go to Cambodia with him. Now understand that my parents had also retired in their 50s, and they spent 20 years traveling the world, building churches, building orphanages, training centers, Africa, South America, Europe, and Southeast Asia. And when my dad called me, he'd already been to Cambodia about 30 times. So he was quite experienced in going to that country. Frankly, I didn't particularly care about going to Cambodia. There's a lot of other places I thought would be a lot more fun than that place. But I wanted to spend time with my dad. So I went. And I can tell you that within about 3 or 4 days of arriving in Phnom Penh, I fell in love with that country. And I can't explain it to you, except that I love the people, the culture, the food is fantastic. And we have great opportunity there to spend time addressing some really significant needs in that country. So before I talk about what we do with the kids and with well, they're called widows there. A widow there has a little different connotation than it does here. Here, a widow is a woman whose husband has died. In Cambodia, it's a woman whose husband has died or her husband has abandoned her. And that's happening in droves in that country. So I want to show you, Cambodia, a country of about 14.5 million people. But I want to go back a bit to the history and share with you a little bit about what this country has experienced, so you understand the context in which we get our kids, kind of the framework by which they think about life, what they've experienced in life. And it starts for most of them in 1975 when Pol Pot and the Khmer Rouge came into power. Pol Pot wanted to take his country back to year zero, to an agrarian society where everyone farmed on collective farms. So he went through the process of creating a hit list of those that were not worthy to live in his country anymore. That list, and so by the way, he killed almost 2 million of his own people through torture and execution, and another 1 million plus died directly as a result of his policies through starvation and disease during that time. His goal, as I said, was to take the country back to year zero. And so he systematically killed, sought out and killed anyone that was educated. You might think about yourself, if you lived in Cambodia during this time, where would you have survived the Pol Pot Khmer Rouge years? So if you were educated, you were killed. If you wore glasses or corrective lens, took those off pretty quick. People of faith, the Christian church was completely decimated in Cambodia. Pol Pot killed, by the way, Buddhist monks and people of his own religion. It didn't matter to him. If you were religious, you died. If you owned a business, you were marked for execution. Professional people, doctors, lawyers, architects, CPAs, all were sought out, tortured, and killed. And by the way, it included almost always their entire family as well. They didn't want a family member left that could come back for retribution at some later date. Pol Pot eliminated banks, he banned money, he banned holidays, and he banned the family unit as a societal norm. No longer wanted that structure at all. So currently in Cambodia, 68% of the population is under the age of 30. So imagine Modesto's population, over 2/3, under the age of 30. That's what it is today. Just 57% of children attend school, and 20% of those students graduate from high school. When you do the math, that means that there's slightly over 11% of children that graduate from high school in Cambodia. A minuscule amount of that 20% are actually able to go on to university. 20% of the population live on $1.25 a day. 90% of kids, school-age kids, are engaged in child labor, either forced or, well, it's always forced, isn't it? It's child labor, but they're helping their families, or in some cases being sold or rented to factory work. There is no safety net for the poor of any kind. If you're poor and hungry and hurt, too bad, you die. Transparency International has this perceived corruption index that they publish every year of the rating countries on their corruption scale in their governments. Cambodia slightly improved this last go around to number 156 out of 175 nations. Countries that are worse than Cambodia in terms of corruption include places like Somalia and North Korea and so forth, African countries. Incredibly corrupt government. So, when I went to Cambodia, I encountered this orphan problem. Orphans everywhere, kids everywhere. And by the way, they're called vulnerable children now, not orphans so much. But as I went back in 2011, 2012, it didn't take long to figure out what they really had is a poverty problem. Poverty driving this incredible environment where children are at risk all the time. So 83% of the population live out in the provinces or in the country. It's incredibly primitive. Much of the country is accessible only by boat, by the way. Len and I have been to some of those places. Some of the rest of you have. I know Mike's been with me. Jeff has been out in those places where you ride for hours in a boat to get to a little village where there's no electricity, there's no clean water, there's no sanitation, by the way. So it's really quite an experience, and so that's where our kids that end up at Antioch Orphanage, the name of our orphanage, grow up. I show you this village, Jeff's been there with me, called Kota Som. It's on an island, difficult to get to, and very typical of rural living in Cambodia. You'll see that the houses are up on stilts. That's because of the monsoon rains that come through and flood the entire area, so it looks like a vast lake. On the bottom left, that's me with little kiddos on that island. There are about 850 people there. We just recently helped fund a building on that island that doubles as a school and a church, and kind of the community center. Those kids are going to school for the first time ever in the history of that island, of that place. Kids are now going to school, and by the way, their teacher is the most educated person on that island. He made it through 3rd grade. So that's the education that these kids are getting. So, grinding poverty. Dads are leaving for Thailand because that's where the work is. They can make more money there with good intentions to send money back home. The problem is that most of them don't. Many of them find another wife and stay in Thailand. So now you have mom and kids back in a place like this, a little village with no way to get out, no way to earn a living, and so they become widows. So if you're a poor woman with no land, no food for your kids, what's the last asset you have left? It's your daughters, or in some cases, a son. And so little girls are often sent off to Thailand, to other places, into Phnom Penh and the big cities where the brothels are. Sometimes a landowner will get themselves in trouble financially, and so they go to a loan shark who will lend them money at rates like 20% per month. They can't pay it back. And And so parents will often sell their kids, or in some cases rent their child to a brothel for 2 or 3 months to pay a debt. One of our children at our orphanage is a 13-year-old who survived for 2 years before she came to us by foraging for snails in the rice paddies. Abandoned, she lived, and she's now with us. And our most recent kids were a little boy, 11, and his sister, 4, whose parents left when she was just an infant baby for Thailand and have not been heard from since. Very common story. So there's kids everywhere with these stories, and the Cambodian government wants us to care for what they call true orphans. True orphans. An orphan with no parents living. But what do you do with these little kiddos that show up on our doorstep who are beaten and abused and are in danger of being sent off somewhere to hell on earth? So we have kids that in fact probably do have a living parent somewhere in the world. We just don't know where they are. And they're unlikely to ever come back. So that takes me to our orphanage, Antioch. It's in Battambang, a city that is in the northwest part of Cambodia. It's a fairly large city, and this is on property where the church was built in the year 2000 by my parents. And a local group of people here in Modesto. So that campus had an old 2-story building, which I'll show you in a minute, that we converted to housing to get started. So on the left is our first 10 kids, got their little school uniforms on, and then we began adding kids as they came to us. That's the building that they currently live in. We're out of room. We have no more place to put kids. So we're embarking on a program to build housing for children. And I can tell you one of the most difficult things that I do is to receive emails from our director who says things like, John, I just had 2 kids show up on our doorstep. Most recent case was 2 little girls, sisters, aged 10 and 12. Can we take them? And I emailed back, as I always do, and asked for the history of these girls. Do they have family somewhere? Are there other alternatives before they come to us? And I received an email the next morning saying, I'm sorry, we're too late. They've already been sent to Thailand. It's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. Every day we're there, we see evidence of kids and women whose lives are destroyed by the poverty they experience there. So I also want to show you, by the way, what Tim O'Brien, who's on our board, and his son Brady brought over this summer. So I want to get on to a little more good news here. They brought over computers and set up a computer lab for our kids. And we can virtually not get them to go to bed at night to get off these computers. For the first time in their lives, they're learning English on Rosetta Stone, which is a key for them in their future to learn English, much like our southern neighbors learn English in order to have job opportunities here. That's also true in Cambodia. And there's other programs we've loaded that they're working on. No internet yet. We haven't figured out how we want to do that. I wanted to show you what the government school classrooms look like. Government school, public school is free, but they're only half day. And you're required to have a uniform to go to school, and you have to have pencils, none of which the school provides. So if your parents can't afford a uniform or pencils, you don't go to school, which is why almost half the kids in Cambodia don't get an education. So that cycle of poverty just continues over and over again. By the way, most kids in Cambodia, when they do go to school, are behind grade level significantly. A little 11-year-old boy I just mentioned, and his 4-year-old sister, he just started school just this last month for the first time in his life. So part of our job is not only to get them in school and give them a good education, but we have a lot of remedial work to do. So that classroom, this building will become classroom space, computer lab, and we're hoping to supplement what they get in the public